Collision of Worlds. The city park was alive that Saturday afternoon, its air thick with the noise of children laughing, vendors calling out prices of popcorn and lemonade, and music spilling from scattered speakers brought by street performers. In the center of the wide stone square, a girl in a faded red sweatshirt and scuffed sneakers spun gracefully to the rhythm of an old portable speaker. Her name was Maya Williams, just 17, but with the heart of someone who had already carried too much of life on her shoulders. Each movement she made told a story, her arms reaching upward like she was grasping at something beyond sight, her feet striking the pavement with a defiance that spoke louder than any words. She wasn't just dancing for joy. She was dancing for survival. Every weekend she came here with her little donation box taped with handwritten words, "Help my mom's treatment. Every step is for her." And though most people walked past without a glance, a few would pause, watch her fluid strength, and toss in $1 or two. That afternoon, however, Maya's dance drew a pair of eyes she didn't expect. Across the square, a young girl in a wheelchair sat quietly, her golden hair tied back with a pale blue ribbon. Her name was Emily Everett, only 8 years old, and unlike the other children racing about with kites and scooters, she sat still, watching intently. Her wide eyes followed Maya's every move, and for the first time in weeks, a small smile curled across her lips. Emily had not smiled much lately, not since her mother's passing 2 years ago, not since her health had taken a downturn, and not since her father had buried himself in walls of glass offices and guarded silences. But watching Maya dance, something stirred inside her, a flicker of light. She clapped her hands once, startling her caretaker, and rolled her chair forward, inch by inch, until she was just a few feet away from the girl, spinning like the music lived in her blood. Maya noticed her then. The rhythm slowed, her feet tapped. Softer, and with a bright grin, she twirled closer to Emily, crouching low so their eyes were level. "Want to try a move with me?" she asked gently, extending her hand. For a moment, Emily hesitated, her lips trembling with the effort of forming words she seldom spoke anymore. Then, in a small but clear voice, she whispered, "Yes." And with that, Maya began to sway in a simple rhythm, guiding Emily's small hands through the air, mimicking her steps with her arms while the wheels of the chair turned slowly to match. The square filled with laughter as Emily let out a soft giggle, her cheeks flushing with life that had been missing for so long. But just as that fragile joy blossomed, a tall shadow fell over them. A man in a dark tailored coat, his expression tight and thunderous, strode across the pavement. He was John Everett, billionaire, philanthropist, and father to Emily, though in that moment he looked less like a father and more like a judge delivering sentence. "Get away from my daughter," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the music. His words were followed by something colder, something Maya had heard too many times before but had never grown numb to. "You don't belong here. You people always find a way to push yourselves where you shouldn't be." The bystanders fell silent, watching with the hungry eyes of gossip as the man loomed over a girl barely out of childhood. Maya froze, her chest tightening. She had done nothing wrong, only danced, only tried to share a moment of joy, but she saw the suspicion in his gaze, the cruel assumption that she was there for money, for some scheme. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, and though her throat trembled, she forced herself to speak. "I didn't know who she was," she said firmly, though her voice quivered. "I dance here every weekend. I wasn't trying to take anything from her, I was just trying to make her smile." But John wasn't listening. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, and his tone dripped with disdain. "You expect me to believe that? Out of all the children here, you just happened to pick my daughter, the daughter of a man who owns half this city? Spare me your stories." "I've heard them before." Emily tugged weakly at his coat. "Daddy, she's my friend," she said softly, but he ignored her. His anger boiled over. With a sudden shove, he pushed Maya back from the wheelchair, his hand gripping her shoulder with more force than he intended. She stumbled, crashing against the metal bench behind her, the sharp edge jarring her ribs and sending pain ripping through her side. Her speaker toppled to the ground, shattering as it struck the pavement, and her small donation box spilled coins across the square. A hush fell over the crowd, broken only by Emily's cry, "Daddy, stop!" But John, jaw locked, began pushing the wheelchair away, determined to remove his daughter from the scene. What happened next shifted everything. Distracted by his buzzing phone, John's grip loosened on the wheelchair handles just as one wheel caught a crack in the pavement. Slowly at first, then faster, the chair rolled forward down a slight slope, heading directly toward the street where cars raced past. Panic erupted in the air. Someone shouted. Emily screamed. But Maya was already moving. Ignoring the sharp ache in her side and the blood dripping from her scraped knee, she sprinted across the pavement. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred. But she reached the chair just as its front wheels tipped over the curb. Throwing her entire weight against it, she stopped it inches before an oncoming car screeched to a halt, horn blaring. The impact sent Maya sprawling to the ground, her skin tearing against the rough concrete. But Emily was safe. The world around them roared with chaos, shouts, the screech of tires. John turned in shock, his face draining of color as he ran back toward his daughter. Emily was crying, clutching Maya's hand. "She saved me." "Daddy," she sobbed, "she saved me." John stopped, chest heaving, his eyes falling on the girl lying bruised and bleeding at his feet. For the first time he saw not a stranger, not a threat, but someone who had risked everything to protect what he held most dear. He knelt awkwardly, the words catching in his throat. I didn't know. I thought," his voice faltered, as Maya's eyes, fierce despite her pain, met his. "You called me a rat," she whispered hoarsely. "You shoved me, you made me feel like I was nothing." John swallowed hard, his pride crumbling. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. "I saw what I wanted to see, not what was in front of me. I thought you were using her, but you—" He looked at Emily, who still clung to Maya's scraped hand like it was a lifeline. "You gave her something I couldn't. You gave her back her smile." For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the city's hum. Maya, struggling to rise, winced at the pain in her ribs but refused to cry. She glanced at Emily, whose tear-streaked face lit with something deeper than gratitude, trust. And it was that trust that pierced through John's iron armor more than anything else could dot as the murmurs of the crowd swelled. John stood and extended a hesitant hand to Maya, his voice softened, no longer commanding but almost pleading. "I don't know how to make this right, but if you're willing, I'd like to try, not charity, not pity, a chance. Would you consider spending time with Emily? She needs you?" Maya stared at him, stunned. Part of her wanted to turn away, to reject him for the humiliation, for the shove, for the cruel words that still echoed in her mind. But then Emily's trembling voice whispered, "Please." That single word, fragile yet powerful, cut through everything. Maya slowly nodded, her chest still rising with uneven breaths. "I'll stay for her," she said at last. "But don't ever treat me like that again." John's eyes darkened with shame, and he bowed his head. "Never again," he promised. And as Maya sat back beside Emily on the same bench where she had been pushed only minutes before, the park grew quiet. The whispers faded into the rustling of leaves, and the world, for just a moment, seemed to breathe again. Uneasy beginnings. The following Monday, Maya stood frozen before the tall iron gates of the Everett estate. They stretched skyward like something out of a dream or a nightmare, ornate, polished and guarded by cameras that followed her every nervous step. She clutched the strap of her worn backpack, the same one she used to carry her schoolbooks and spare dance shoes, and tried to still the shaking in her stomach. Only a few days earlier she had been humiliated, shoved, and accused, in front of strangers. Only a few days earlier she had saved Emily from being crushed under the wheels of an oncoming car. And now, against all odds, she was standing at the gates of a man whose world couldn't have been further from hers. A voice crackled from the intercom. "State your name." Maya cleared her throat, her voice dry. "Maya Williams." "John Everett asked me to come." The silence that followed was suffocating. She wondered if this was some cruel test, if perhaps he had offered her the invitation in guilt and never truly meant for her to arrive. But then, with a slow mechanical groan, the gates swung open, revealing a driveway lined with tall oaks and rose bushes, so neatly pruned they looked sculpted. Maya took a deep breath and stepped forward, her sneakers crunching on gravel that seemed too clean, too perfect for someone like her to walk on. When she reached the front of the mansion, she nearly stumbled from the sheer size of it. The white stone facade stretched endlessly, with windows that glimmered like watchful eyes. The front doors, carved with intricate patterns, opened before she could knock. A butler in a crisp uniform stood there, his posture rigid, his eyes unreadable. "This way, Miss Williams," he said, his voice neutral, betraying nothing, though. Maya caught the faintest flicker of curiosity or perhaps disapproval in his glance. She followed him through gleaming marble halls, her reflection staring back at her from polished floors, until they arrived in a sunlit room where Emily sat by a wide window. The moment Emily saw Maya, her face lit with joy. "You came!" she exclaimed, her voice stronger than it had been in the park. Her wheelchair rolled forward eagerly, her small hands gripping the rims. Maya's nerves melted at smile. All the cold marble, the staring portraits of long-dead Everetts, the weight of her outsider status, it all faded in the warmth of Emily's welcome. She knelt beside the little girl, hugging her gently, careful not to press too hard. "Of course I came," Maya whispered. "I couldn't leave you hanging." Emily giggled, already tugging at her hand. "You have to show me another dance." Before Maya could respond, a presence filled the doorway. John Everett stood there, tall and severe, dressed as though he had just stepped from a boardroom rather than his own home. His gaze locked on Maya, studying her the way a man accustomed to contracts and acquisitions might study a potential deal. He nodded once. "You came," he said, his tone neither warm nor cold, just measured. "I wasn't sure you would." Maya rose to her feet, refusing to shrink under his gaze. "I almost didn't," she admitted bluntly. "But she asked me." She glanced at Emily, who smiled innocently, unaware of the tension between her father and her new friend. John's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he motioned to a staff member lingering nearby. "Bring refreshments." Then to Maya he added, "You don't need to feel pressured. I owe you more than I can repay. Spending time with Emily is not an obligation. It's a choice." His voice softened almost imperceptibly, but Maya caught it. For the first time, he wasn't speaking like a businessman issuing instructions. He was speaking like a father uncertain of his footing. She tilted her chin upward, her pride anchoring her in place. "I don't want anything from you, Mr. Everett. Not your money, not your guilt. I'm here for her, and only her." That night, when Maya returned home to the cramped apartment she shared with her mother, she replayed every moment in her mind. Vanessa Williams, her mother, lay propped against a pile of pillows, her skin pale but her spirit bright as ever. "So," she said with a faint smile, "you set foot inside the palace of the mighty Everett. How did it feel?" Maya sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaling deeply. "Like I didn't belong. Like everyone was waiting for me to trip, just to prove I was out of place. But then Emily looked at me, and it felt worth it." Vanessa reached out, brushing her daughter's cheek. "That's because it is. Don't ever measure yourself by their marble floors and high ceilings. Belonging doesn't come from walls, it comes from people. And clearly, that little girl has already chosen you." The next few days unfolded like a cautious dance. Maya returned to the estate after school, teaching Emily simple routines she could mimic with her arms and chair, making her laugh until her cheeks hurt. Slowly, Emily began speaking more, her voice hesitant but determined, as though Maya's presence had given her the courage to break the silence she had wrapped around herself for so long. John often hovered at the edges of these sessions, pretending to read reports or check emails, but his eyes lingered on his daughter, on the way she glowed when Maya was near. It unsettled him. He had hired the best therapists, the best doctors, the best tutors money could buy, yet none had drawn out Emily's joy the way this girl from the other side of the city had in a matter of days. But outside the walls of the Everett home, whispers began to circulate. At charity luncheons and board meetings, voices lowered behind polished champagne glasses. "Have you heard?" someone would say. "John Everett has some street girl keeping company with his daughter." Others murmured about reputations, about appearances, about how fragile influence could be. John heard these whispers, and though he did not immediately voice them, they echoed in his mind late at night. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself Emily's happiness outweighed gossip. Yet years of conditioning, of guarding his empire against scrutiny, made him restless. Could he allow this? Or would it all collapse under the weight of scandal and whispers? One evening, as Maya prepared to leave, John finally confronted her directly. "Why are you doing this?" he asked abruptly. Maya blinked, confused. "Doing what?" He gestured vaguely toward Emily, who was dozing in her chair after hours of giggling and twirling her arms. "Her smiles, her laughter, it's been months since I've seen them, and you brought them back. Why?" His voice cracked, betraying a vulnerability he rarely allowed. Maya hesitated, then spoke with quiet honesty. "Because she deserves it. Because when I look at her, I see someone who's been carrying pain too heavy for her size. And I know what that feels like." For the first time, John Everett did not have a rebuttal. He simply looked at her, and though his expression remained guarded, there was a shift in his eyes, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, this girl had stepped into their world for a reason he could not yet understand. Whispers and shadows, the weeks passed, and what had begun as a cautious arrangement slowly blossomed into something neither Maya nor John had anticipated. Every afternoon after school, Maya would arrive at the Everett estate, greeted not with suspicion anymore, but with Emily's shrill squeal of delight and the eager spin of her wheelchair. The mansion, once cold and forbidding to Maya's eyes, had started to soften in the corners. She knew which window Emily liked to sit by when the sun was setting, and which hallway echoed best when they played silly games of chair tag, with Emily chasing her through the marble corridors. But even as the inside of the mansion warmed with laughter, the world beyond its iron gates grew colder. Whispering questions like poison winds slipping through cracks. At first, it was subtle. Maya noticed the way staff members exchanged glances when she passed, as though her presence disrupted the natural order of their world. She felt the weight of their silence when she entered the dining hall. The hesitation before they addressed her, the unspoken reminder that she was an outsider. Then came the murmurs at the Everett Foundation board meetings, murmurs that John overheard and carried home in tight-lipped silence. Evelyn Prescott, one of the most influential board members, led the charge. She was sharp, immaculately dressed, and wielded her social influence like a weapon. "John," she had said one evening after a meeting, her voice syrupy with false concern, "we've noticed you've allowed certain company into your household. Don't you think it sends the wrong message? Appearances matter. The cracked sidewalks, the flickering streetlights, the smell of fried food from the corner stand." It reminded her of where she came from and where she feared she would always remain. One Saturday evening, the Everetts hosted a charity gala in their grand ballroom. John had hesitated to bring Maya, but Emily insisted. "She's my friend," Emily said stubbornly, clutching her father's hand. "She should be here." And so Maya found herself in a shimmering gown borrowed from one of the house staff, standing under glittering chandeliers among men and women who wore diamonds like casual trinkets. The air was thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of power being exchanged in polite conversation. Maya felt like an imposter, her heart pounding as she clutched a glass of water, trying to disappear into the shadows. It was there that Evelyn found her. She approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, her every step calculated. "You must be Maya," she said smoothly, her gaze raking over the girl's borrowed gown. "Emily has spoken of you." Maya straightened, forcing herself not to shrink back. "Yes, I spend time with her." Evelyn's smile sharpened. "How charming. You must feel very proud to be the subject of such affection. But do forgive me for being blunt, dear. This world is delicate. It doesn't take much to tarnish it, and I fear your presence here complicates matters. Not for you, of course, but for Emily, for John." The words dripped with polite cruelty, Cloaked as concern but aimed to wound, Maya's throat tightened, but before she could respond she felt a small hand slip into hers. Emily, who had wheeled herself into the circle unnoticed, looked up at Evelyn with surprising steel in her young eyes. "She's not a complication," Emily said firmly. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the chatter around them. "She's my friend. She makes me happy. And I don't care what anybody thinks." Gasps rippled through nearby guests, for Emily Everett had not spoken so publicly in a long time. Evelyn blinked, momentarily disarmed, her practiced composure faltering. Maya squeezed Emily's hand, warmth flooding her chest, later that evening. When the gala had ended and the mansion quieted, John found Maya in the garden, staring up at the night sky. For once, he didn't approach her with guarded words. His voice was low, almost reverent. "She defended you tonight. Do you know how rare that is? Emily has barely spoken to anyone outside this house for months. Yet she stood up for you." Maya turned to face him, her expression resolute. "Because I'm not here to take anything. I'm here because she asked me to be. But if your world can't accept that, maybe I don't belong here after all." John looked at her for a long time, the weight of Evelyn's warnings heavy on his shoulders. Yet in that moment he saw his daughter's laughter, her voice, her courage, all things that had been silent before Maya arrived. And he realized that perhaps the world he had built, the world obsessed with appearances and reputation, was the very thing suffocating his child. He exhaled slowly, as though letting go of something he had carried for too long. "You belong here more than any of them," he said finally. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew the battle was far from over. The whispers outside the gates were growing louder, and soon they would demand more than just words. The smear campaign. Gala was supposed to have been a celebration of progress, a showcase of the Everett Foundation's charitable work, a demonstration of John's continuing influence, and a moment to highlight new initiatives for children's health care. Yet in the days that followed, the only thing anyone spoke about was not the programs or donations, but the sight of a young black girl at John Everett's side, defending herself with the fragile courage of a 17-year-old and the unwavering support of his disabled daughter. What had been whispered in corners now became headlines in society columns, then louder still in business journals. Photographs circulated, Maya in the borrowed gown holding Emily's hand. Maya pushing Emily's wheelchair across the marble floor. Maya, wide-eyed, standing among elites who looked at her like she had stumbled into the wrong play dot at first. Maya ignored the noise. She told herself it was gossip, nothing more. But soon it became impossible to avoid. She saw the articles displayed on newsstands as she walked home from school. Billionaire heir befriends street girl innocence or recklessness. She overheard mothers in the grocery store whispering while looking her way. And one morning, she opened her phone to see her own name trending online, twisted into hashtags she could barely stomach. Strangers dissected her life as if she were an exhibit, her skin color, her neighborhood, her lack of wealth, her every flaw turned into ammunition. The worst blow came when Evelyn Prescott, the board member who had cornered her at the gala, decided to escalate matters. Using her network of journalists and so-called concerned donors, Evelyn began leaking fragments of Maya's family history. Old medical bills were dredged up, her mother's name dragged into the light with whispers of debt and dependency. Vanessa, who had lived her life quietly, became a target in a way she had never asked for. Articles painted her as irresponsible for raising Maya without a father, insinuating failures where there had only been resilience. Is this the role model John Everett wants near his daughter? One article asked pointedly, the words underlined with venom. For Maya, it felt like drowning. Every time she danced in the park now, people didn't just see a girl raising money for her sick mother, they saw the headlines, the gossip, the ugly caricature drawn by people who had never once looked her in the eye. She wanted to quit too. Run, to shield her mother from the humiliation. Maybe they're right, she confessed one night, her voice breaking as she sat by Vanessa's bedside. Maybe I don't belong there. Maybe I never should have stayed after that day. Her mother's hand, frail but steady, reached for hers. Maya, Vanessa said softly, her voice carrying the kind of strength born only from years of survival. These people don't get to define you. They're afraid of you. Do you know why? Because in their world, money is power. But you have something they can't buy. You have spirit. You walked into that mansion with nothing but your talent and your heart, and you changed Emily's life. Don't let their fear make you small. Maya blinked back tears, but doubt still gnawed at her. It was Emily who pulled her back from the edge. When Maya returned to the estate after the smear campaign hit its loudest note, Emily wheeled up. To her, clutching something in her lap. It was a notebook, the pages filled with messy scrawls and doodles. "I wrote you something," Emily said shyly. Maya opened the notebook and found lyrics, clumsy and childlike, but filled with determination. Brave doesn't ask permission. Brave doesn't wait for yes. Brave is when you stand up even when the world says sit down. Emily's cheeks flushed as she explained, "It's a song. For you, because you're brave, Maya." The words hit Maya like sunlight after weeks of rain. She realized then that the smear campaign wasn't just about her. It was about breaking the bond she and Emily had built, about reminding her that she was less than, so she'd retreat. But if she retreated, Emily would lose the spark she had only just found again. That night, Maya recorded herself dancing. With Emily in the sunroom, Emily standing tall. The boardroom of the Everett Foundation was unlike any space Maya had ever stepped into. It wasn't just the high ceilings or the polished mahogany table that stretched endlessly before her, gleaming under crystal chandeliers. It was the aura, the weight of decision-making that had the power to shape hospitals, schools, and entire communities. Around the table sat men and women in tailored suits, each face sharp with the confidence of wealth and legacy. At the head of the table was John Everett, his expression carefully composed, betraying none of the turbulence he felt inside. And at the far end, leaning back with smug certainty, sat Evelyn Prescott, her pearl necklace glinting under the lights, her lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. Maya stood just inside the door, clutching the strap of her backpack as though it were a shield. She had not dressed for this occasion in designer clothes or shimmering jewels. Instead, she wore her own modest dress, ironed crisp, her hair neatly braided by her mother the night before. She wanted no illusions. If she was to speak here, it would be as herself, not as some version polished to please their gaze. Yet, as she looked at the powerful figures surrounding the table, she felt the old doubt tug at her chest. What was she doing here, a girl from the cracked sidewalks of the city, about to address people who controlled fortunes greater than she could even imagine? The meeting began with routine business, but the tension was palpable. Finally, Evelyn leaned forward, folding her manicured hands. "Mr. Everett," she said, with a voice as smooth as silk, "we must address the matter that has clouded this foundation's reputation, this young woman." Her eyes flicked to Maya, cold and appraising. "She has been a constant presence in your household. Her background, her circumstances, her unfortunate publicity, it all raises questions. Donors are concerned. Stakeholders are wary. And quite frankly, many of us believe she poses a liability to the image of this institution." She paused, for effect, letting the weight of her words settle like a blade against Maya's neck. "The foundation cannot afford scandal." Whispers rippled across the table. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. John cleared his throat, ready to respond, but before he could, Maya stepped forward. Her heart thundered, but her voice, though trembling at first, grew steadier with each word. "You don't even know me," she began. "All you know are the headlines and the whispers. You look at me and see where I come from, not who I am. You see my mother's hospital, bills, my neighborhood, my skin, and you think it tells the whole story. But it doesn't." She lifted her chin, meeting Evelyn's gaze with unwavering determination. "My mother has worked harder with nothing than most people do with everything. She taught me to fight when life tried to break us. She taught me that dignity doesn't come from money or status. It comes from how you carry yourself when the world tries to make you small. And when your world pushed me down, when I was shoved in a public park and called a name that still burns in my ears, I stood back up. Not because I wanted anything from you, but because your daughter looked at me with trust. Because Emily needed me, and I won't apologize for being there for her. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the girl who spoke with a fire that no smear article could extinguish. Maya continued, her voice rising. You call me a liability? Emily's laughter returned because of me. Emily's voice found strength again because of me. The same child you love and claim to protect was silent, grieving, and fading until she found someone who saw her not as a billionaire's heir, not as a patient, but as a little girl who deserved joy. If that's a liability, then maybe you've all forgotten what this foundation was built for. A sharp intake of breath echoed from someone near the end of the table. Evelyn's composure faltered for a flicker of a second, but she recovered quickly, her tone dripping with disdain. Touching words, she said coolly, but sentiment does not secure donors or safeguard reputation. Before Maya could respond, an elderly man at the table, Mr. Whitaker, one of the longest-serving board members, cleared his throat. His voice was gravelly but firm. Evelyn's reputation is not safeguarded by silencing courage. I've sat at this table long enough to know when the truth walks into the room and that girl speaks it. I, for one, would rather align this foundation with her spirit than with fear. His words hung in the air, a challenge to the narrative Evelyn had so carefully crafted. Others began to murmur in agreement. One woman spoke quietly. I've seen the video of her and Emily. That wasn't publicity, it was real, authentic, the kind of thing this foundation should stand for. Another man nodded. Our donors aren't blind. They care about stories of resilience. Maybe this isn't the scandal Evelyn claims it is. Maybe it's the heart we've been missing. John, who had sat in silence, finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of authority. This foundation was created by my late wife, not to serve the egos of elites, but to bring hope where it was most needed. Maya has done for my daughter what no doctor, no therapist, no program has achieved in 2 years. And if anyone in this room believes her presence is a liability, then perhaps they've forgotten why we are here. His eyes swept the room, daring anyone to contradict him. A vote was called. The board members shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, at Evelyn's seething glare, at John's resolute expression, at Maya's unwavering stance. The tally was close, narrower than John had hoped, but in the end, the majority sided in Maya's favor. She would not be barred from Emily's life. The foundation, at least officially, would not cast her aside. When the meeting ended, Evelyn swept past Maya with a glare that promised the battle was not over. But Maya stood taller than she had ever stood before. She walked out of the boardroom, not as a charity case, not as a scandal, but as someone who had faced the weight of power and refused to bend. And as she stepped into the hallway, Emily came, rushing toward her, her wheelchair wheels squeaking against the marble. You did it, Emily cried, throwing her arms around Maya. Tears filled Maya's eyes as she hugged the little girl back, whispering, No, we did it, together. For the first time in her life, Maya understood what it meant to stand tall, not just for herself, but for the people who needed her to. And though she knew Evelyn and others like her would not stop their attacks, she also knew this: she had a voice now, and it was louder than any whisper in the shadows. The movement, the weeks following the boardroom confrontation, carried a new kind of energy. For the first time since she had stepped into the Everett mansion, Maya did not feel like a shadow or an intruder. She walked with her head higher, her steps steadier, and though whispers still lingered, they no longer pierced her spirit the way they once had. Emily continued to thrive, her laughter echoing through the halls more often than silence, her notebook filling with sketches and lyrics she proudly shared with Maya each day. John Everett, too, had changed. The cold edges of his demeanor had softened. He no longer hovered at a distance, but engaged, asking questions, watching with a father's grateful eyes as his daughter bloomed again. Yet even in those brighter days, Maya could sense a storm building on the horizon, because power never surrenders quietly, and Evelyn Prescott was not a woman who accepted defeat. The storm arrived in the form of a scandal carefully manufactured to strike at Maya's heart. Late one evening, photos began circulating, online, grainy images of Maya taken from her own social media. Snapshots of her in the park, of her worn apartment building, even of her sitting in a hospital waiting room beside her mother. They were accompanied by captions dripping with scorn. "This is who John Everett allows to shape his daughter's world? A girl with no pedigree, no stability, clinging to sympathy and exposure?" Some posts went further, twisting her story into something ugly, suggesting she was exploiting Emily for fame. The cruelty was unrelenting. At first, Maya crumbled. She locked herself in her small bedroom, refusing to answer texts, refusing to return to the mansion. For hours, she sat with her knees pulled to her chest, scrolling through the hateful comments until her eyes blurred with tears. She thought of her mother, already weakened by illness, being forced to read strangers' insults about her parenting. She thought of Emily, who might see the headlines and believe them. The weight of it threatened to crush her, but then a soft knock at her door pulled her from despair. Vanessa entered, her face pale but her eyes fierce. "Maya," she said gently, "they can take your picture, they can spin their lies, but they cannot steal your truth. Only you decide who you are. The world is watching now, yes, but what they need isn't silence. They need your voice. They need your heart. You've been fighting for Emily, for me, for yourself. Maybe it's time to fight for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." The next day, Maya returned to the Everett estate with a decision burning in her chest. Instead of hiding, she sat with Emily in front of the same sunroom window where they had danced countless times before. With John's cautious blessing, she recorded a video message, raw, unpolished, her voice trembling but steady with conviction. "They call me unfit," she said into the camera. "They say I don't belong. But I am not ashamed of where I come from. My mother raised me with strength even when she had nothing. I dance in the streets because joy should never depend on wealth. And Emily, she's not my project, she's my friend. She saved me as much as I saved her. So if you see me, see the truth, that every child deserves laughter. Every voice deserves to be heard, and no one's worth is measured by their zip code or their skin color." The video spread with lightning speed. Unlike the smear campaign, this message came from Maya herself, unfiltered and unshaken. People connected with her authenticity. Hashtags that once mocked her turned into banners of support. Hashtag See the Truth, hashtag Brave DOES and Task Permission, hashtag Maya Movement. Teachers shared her video. In classrooms, parents told their children about her courage. Even politicians, eager to align themselves with hope, began to mention her name in speeches about education and equality. The narrative had shifted. What Evelyn had intended as a final blow became the spark of something greater, a movement. Larger than Maya, larger than Emily, larger even than John Everett's empire. Soon, invitations began to arrive. Community centers wanted her to speak. Schools asked her to visit. Nonprofits requested her presence at rallies. John, at first hesitant to expose her further, eventually understood that this was no longer about protection, it was about empowerment. And so, with his resources and Maya's vision, they created a new initiative, the Maya Movement, dedicated to bringing art, mentorship, and hope to children from underserved neighborhoods. At the launch event, cameras flashed and reporters swarmed. But Maya stood before the microphone not as a girl caught in scandal, but as a young woman stepping into her purpose. Her speech was simple but unforgettable. "For too long," she said, her voice carrying through the auditorium, "kids like me have been told we don't belong in rooms like this, that our stories are shameful, that our voices don't matter, but I'm here to say we do belong. Our stories matter, our voices matter." Emily reminded me of that when she sang her song. And I promise you, this movement is not about me, it's about every child who has ever been overlooked. It's about giving them the chance to dance, to sing, to hope, to dream. The crowd erupted in applause, not polite but thunderous, the kind that comes from souls stirred rather than ears entertained. Even John, who had built his life on controlling every detail, found himself wiping at his eyes, humbled by the sheer force of truth spoken without fear. Emily, seated proudly beside Maya, clapped with her whole heart, her eyes shining with pride. Evelyn Prescott did not attend the launch. Her influence, once unshakable, had begun to wane under the weight of public opinion. She still held power in certain circles, but the tide had turned irrevocably. The world no longer cared for her polished image of respectability. It cared for Maya's raw, undeniable courage. Months later, the mural was unveiled at a community center in Maya's neighborhood, a towering painting of children of all races and abilities dancing beneath a rising sun. At the center of it, immortalized in brilliant color, were two figures, a girl spinning with joy and a child in a wheelchair laughing beside her. Maya and Emily stood hand in hand before the mural as the crowd cheered, their bond etched not only in paint but in history. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the celebration, Maya whispered to Emily, "We started as a scandal, but look at us now." Emily grinned, her voice strong and clear. "We started as friends. That's all we ever needed." And with that, the music began, and Maya danced once more, this time not for survival, not for donations, but for the sheer power of joy. Emily spun her chair beside her, the two of them moving together like a symbol of resilience and hope. Around them, children danced too, their laughter ringing out like a promise that the future, no matter how heavy the shadows, would always find light again.